The stars belonged to the Valdrine. For 3,000 years their warships had crossed the darkness between worlds, and for 3,000 years every civilization they encountered had fallen. 847 star systems now bore the mark of their dominion. 847 worlds where alien populations had learned to bow their heads and accept their new masters. Supreme Strategos Kelix stood in the command center of the Eternal Triumph, the flagship that had witnessed the conquest of 60 worlds. His form was a masterpiece of biological and mechanical fusion. Metal plates merged seamlessly with living tissue. His 3 eyes glowed with artificial light, while his organic brain processed information through quantum neural networks. He was neither fully machine nor fully flesh, but something that transcended both. The Valdrine had not always been this way. Once, millennia ago, they had been purely organic beings on a dying world. Faced with extinction, they had made a choice that would define their species forever. They merged with their machines, becoming something new, something superior. And with that superiority came a mission that burned in every Valdrine consciousness: to bring order to the chaos of the galaxy. Kelix watched the holographic display showing the expansion of their territory. Each conquered system appeared as a blue marker in the vast sea of stars. The pattern was beautiful in its completeness. The Valdrine did not simply invade worlds. They perfected the art of conquest. Every invasion followed the same proven method. First came the observation phase, where intelligence gatherers studied the target civilization for weaknesses. Then came the ultimatum, broadcast across all frequencies in a show of overwhelming power. Finally, if surrender was not immediate, came the demonstration. The Valdrine would destroy a single military installation or orbital station with such precision and force that resistance crumbled instantly. Most species surrendered after the demonstration. They saw the futility of fighting beings who commanded such power. Those who possessed useful skills or knowledge were absorbed into the dominion, their expertise used to fuel further expansion. Those who had nothing to offer were left to manage their own affairs under Valdrine oversight. It was not cruelty, Kelix believed. It was efficiency. Fleet Commander Zural entered the command center with the smooth, gliding motion characteristic of his particular modification pattern. Where Kelix had chosen to maintain a humanoid form, Zural had embraced a more radical transformation. His lower body resembled a mechanical serpent, allowing him to interface directly with ship systems. His upper torso remained organic, though enhanced with neural processors that made him one of the finest tactical minds in the Dominion. Supreme Strategos, Zural said, his voice carrying the slight metallic resonance of vocal synthesizers. Intelligence Prime Veshka has completed her analysis of Target 848. Kelix turned from the display. Show me. The hologram shifted and a new star system appeared. A yellow sun at the center, several planets in orbit around it. The third planet from the sun glowed with the telltale signs of technological civilization. Atmospheric pollution, electromagnetic emissions, and the orbital debris of space infrastructure. The species calls themselves humans, Zural explained. They inhabit the third planet, which they name Earth. They have also established colonies on 2 other bodies in their system, along with numerous smaller outposts. Population? Kelix asked. Approximately 15 billion across all locations, 12 billion on the primary world. Kelix studied the data streaming across his vision. Chemical rockets. Early fusion technology. Primitive kinetic weapons. By Valdrine standards, this civilization was barely past the threshold of space travel. They had not even mastered their own star system, let alone begun the journey to others. Classification? He asked. Tier 4, Zural replied. Standard invasion force should be more than sufficient. Veshka estimates conquest completion in 14 planetary rotations. Intelligence Prime Veshka materialized in holographic form beside them. Unlike Kelix and Zural, she rarely left her chamber deep within the ship, where she maintained constant connection with the Dominion's vast intelligence network. Her avatar appeared as a shimmering collection of data streams taking vaguely humanoid shape. The humans present an interesting profile, Veshka said, her voice synthesized from pure information. They have a long history of internal conflict. Our scans show evidence of thousands of wars fought among their own kind. Nuclear weapons have been used against their own cities. Their history is saturated with violence. Then they understand strength, Kelix observed. They should recognize superior force when they see it. Perhaps, Veshika replied, though something in her tone suggested uncertainty. However, I note an unusual pattern. Despite their conflicts, they have never unified under a single authority until recently. 50 years ago, they formed something called the United Earth Defense Force following a conflict in their asteroid belt. This represents their first truly unified military structure. Zural made a dismissive gesture. Tier 4 civilizations often attempt unity when they first leave their home world. It changes nothing. We have faced unified species before. They fall just as easily as divided ones. Kellex agreed. In 3,000 years, the Valdrine had encountered every type of civilization imaginable. Peaceful cultures that refused to fight, warrior societies that embraced combat, hive minds with perfect coordination, individual species with chaotic governance. None of it mattered. The Valdrine formula for conquest worked regardless of the target's nature. Prepare the standard invasion fleet, Kellex ordered.
40 warships, 300,000 ground forces.
Zural, you will command this operation personally. It will be conquest number 201 for you, a significant milestone. Zural's biomechanical features arranged themselves into what might have been a smile. I am honored, Supreme Strategos. I will add this system to our glorious record swiftly. See that you do, Kellex said. I want this conquest to serve as a demonstration to the nearby sectors. Let them see how quickly we can absorb a new system. It will encourage future targets to surrender without resistance. The fleet began its preparation immediately. 40 warships, each a masterpiece of Valdrine engineering, assembled in formation. The smallest vessels measured 200 meters in length. The largest, Zural's command ship, Inexorable, stretched nearly a kilometer from bow to stern. Each ship carried weapons capable of cracking planets, though such extreme measures were rarely necessary. The Valdrine preferred to conquer intact worlds that could be put to use. The soldiers who would lead the ground invasion were loaded into their transport vessels. Unlike the varied forms of the command structure, the soldiers were standardized. Each warrior stood exactly 2 meters tall, with reinforced skeletal structures, enhanced musculature, and neural implants that allowed for perfect coordination. They were equipped with energy weapons that could cut through any armor the humans might possess. 300,000 soldiers seemed excessive for a Tier 4 civilization. But the Valdrine believed in overwhelming force. They wanted no possibility of prolonged resistance. A quick, decisive victory served everyone's interests. The conquered suffered less, and the Valdrine could move on to the next target more quickly. As the fleet prepared for departure, Veshika continued her analysis of the target system. She examined every transmission they had intercepted from Earth. News broadcasts, entertainment signals, scientific papers, and military communications. The humans seemed fond of documenting their own history in exhaustive detail. Their information networks were relatively primitive but extensive. One thing troubled Veshika, though she could not quite articulate why. The humans had an unusual relationship with warfare. They studied it obsessively. Their entertainment was filled with stories of conflict. Their history texts devoted enormous space to analyzing battles and military strategies. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own world multiple times over. Most civilizations that achieved such destructive capability either unified to prevent catastrophe or destroyed themselves. The humans had come close to self-destruction several times according to their own records. Yet they had survived. They had even thrived, spreading beyond their home world despite their violent tendencies. Supreme Strategos, Veshika said, manifesting her avatar once more. I recommend caution. The human psychological profile suggests unusual tenacity. Kellex reviewed her concerns. Your recommendation is noted, Intelligence Prime. However, the facts are clear. We possess superior technology, superior numbers, and superior coordination. The humans have never faced an external threat of our magnitude. They will respond the same way all species respond when confronted with the inevitable. As you say, Supreme Strategos, Veshika replied, though her avatar flickered with something that might have been doubt. The fleet departed 3 days later. 40 warships accelerated away from the Dominion's staging area, entering the faster-than-light corridors that would carry them across the stars. The journey would take approximately 20 days. During that time, the crews ran combat simulations and reviewed invasion protocols. Everything proceeded according to the plan that had succeeded 847 times before. Zural spent the journey studying the intelligence reports on humanity. He examined their military capabilities, noting with satisfaction how primitive their weapons appeared. Chemical explosives, electromagnetic projectiles, fission warheads, nothing that could threaten Valdrine armor or shielding. Their ships were crude constructions that relied on simple fusion drives. They had no energy weapons, no quantum shields, no instantaneous communication systems, yet something nagged at the edge of his awareness. Veshka's concerns had planted a seed of uncertainty. Zural accessed the historical records of humanity's internal conflicts. He watched footage of their wars. The savagery shocked him despite his centuries of military experience. Humans fought with a desperation that seemed almost irrational. They continued fighting even when victory was impossible. They refused to surrender even when surrender would save lives. In one conflict, 2 human nations had fought for 4 years over a stretch of territory barely a few hundred kilometers across. Millions had died in trenches, poisoned by chemical weapons, ground down by artillery. Neither side gained significant advantage, yet neither side stopped. The war ended only when both nations collapsed from exhaustion. In another war, a single city had been besieged for nearly 3 years. The defenders ate their own animals, then consumed anything organic they could find. They burned their furniture for warmth. They fought street by street, building by building, room by room. When finally conquered, the city was a ruin and both sides had suffered catastrophic losses. These were not the actions of a rational species responding to threats. This was something else, something that transcended simple survival instinct. Zural brought his concerns to Kelix through the faster-than-light communication link. Supreme Strategos, I have reviewed the human combat records. They display unusual resistance to defeat. I recommend increasing our invasion force. Your caution is understandable but unnecessary, Kelix replied. The humans fought each other with primitive weapons. Against Valdrine technology, their tenacity will be irrelevant. Stay the course, Fleet Commander. This conquest will proceed as all others have. Zural accepted the decision, though his unease remained. He was a soldier with 200 conquests behind him. He had learned to trust his instincts. Something about this target felt different. But perhaps that was simply the anticipation of reaching such a significant milestone in his career. Conquest number 201. It would earn him recognition throughout the Dominion. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, in the region humans called the Kuiper Belt. Zural's instruments immediately registered the presence of human detection systems. Primitive devices, but functional. The humans would know the Valdrine had arrived. Excellent, Zural said. Let them see us. Let them understand what they face. He composed the standard ultimatum that had been issued 847 times before. It would be translated into the primary human languages and broadcast across all frequencies. The message was simple. Surrender peacefully and be absorbed into the Dominion, or resist and be conquered by force. There was no third option. As the message transmitted, Zural allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. In 2 weeks, perhaps less, this system would belong to the Valdrine. The humans would learn their place in the galaxy, and he would add another victory to his already impressive record. The response came 3 hours later. It was not the surrender Zural expected. It was not even a plea for negotiation. It was a single transmission from someone identified as Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. The message contained only one sentence. We've been fighting each other for 10,000 years. We were getting bored anyway. Zural stared at the transmission for a long moment. Then he signaled his fleet to advance. These humans would learn the same lesson every other species had learned. The Valdrine always won. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UEDF carrier Indomitable, watching the tactical display with eyes that had seen too many battles. At 63 years old, she had spent 45 years in military service. She had fought in the Belt Wars, where mining corporations had turned asteroids into weapons. She had commanded peacekeeping forces during the Mars Uprising. She had negotiated truces, broken sieges, and lost more friends than she cared to count. Now she faced something humanity had never encountered before. An alien fleet, real, actual extraterrestrial beings with ships and weapons and apparently hostile intentions. The detection stations in the Kuiper Belt had picked them up 4 hours ago. 40 vessels of unknown design, clearly military in nature, broadcasting a message that left no room for misinterpretation. Surrender or be conquered. Chen had read the message 3 times. Each time she felt a cold anger building in her chest. Humanity had spent centuries fighting itself. Wars over resources, ideology, territory, and pride. Billions had died in conflicts that in retrospect seemed almost pointless. But those conflicts had taught humanity something valuable. They had learned how to fight. More importantly, they had learned how to keep fighting even when every rational calculation said to quit. Status report, Chen ordered. Commander Marcus Webb, her tactical officer, pulled up the latest data. 40 bogies confirmed. Unknown configuration, but mass estimates put the smallest at destroyer-class equivalent, largest at carrier or dreadnought scale. They're maintaining formation as they advance through the Kuiper belt. Current speed suggests they'll reach Neptune orbit in 72 hours. Our forces? 18 combat ships in position. Another 12 en route from Mars orbit. Ground installations on Europa and Titan are at full alert. Earth's orbital defense grid is activating now. 30 ships against 40. Not terrible odds, but the technological disparity remained unknown. The alien vessels showed energy signatures unlike anything in Earth's databases. Their propulsion systems operated on principles human scientists could only guess at. Have they responded to our message? Chen asked. Negative, Admiral. They're ignoring all communication attempts. Chen permitted herself a thin smile. The aliens thought humanity would simply roll over. They thought a threatening message and an impressive fleet would be enough. They had clearly never studied human history. Send a message to all ships, Chen said. Battle stations. Rules of engagement, weapons free on my mark. Tell the crew this is what we've been training for. Tell them to make Earth proud. She turned to her communications officer. Get me a direct line to the Security Council. Within minutes, she was speaking to the gathered leaders of Earth's unified government. Their faces appeared on her screen, transmitted from the council chambers in Geneva. Some looked frightened. Others appeared angry. All of them looked to her for answers. Admiral Chen, the Secretary General said, his voice tight with tension. What are your recommendations? Fight, Chen replied simply. They've given us no option for meaningful negotiation. Their message is clear. They want us to surrender without even knowing what they intend to do with us. That's unacceptable. But Admiral, one of the counselors protested, we don't know what their capabilities are. This could mean the extinction of our species. It could, Chen agreed, but I've read their message carefully. They talk about conquest, not extermination. They want something from us. Resources, labor, knowledge, territory. That means they need us alive. That gives us leverage. Leverage to do what? Get ourselves killed fighting a superior force? Chen leaned forward, her expression hard. I've studied military history my entire life. I've fought in 3 wars. And I've learned one fundamental truth. No enemy is invincible. Every force has weaknesses. Every plan has flaws, and confidence can be a fatal liability. These aliens have conquered other worlds. They think they know how this goes. We're going to teach them something new. The debate continued for another hour, but Chen had already made up her mind. Even if the council ordered her to stand down, she would engage the alien fleet. Some things were worth fighting for, even if victory seemed impossible. The council finally authorized military action, though several members made their reservations clear. Chen cut the connection and returned her attention to the tactical display. The alien fleet was still advancing, maintaining their arrogant formation. They weren't even trying to be subtle or cautious. That told her something important. They expected this to be easy. Commander Webb, she said, start moving the minefield. Webb's eyes widened. The Kuiper minefield? Admiral, those are supposed to defend the outer system in case of exactly this, Chen interrupted. We built those defenses for a reason. Time to use them. The Kuiper minefield was one of humanity's more paranoid defense projects. 20 years ago, military planners had worried about the possibility of hostile first contact. They had seeded the outer system with thousands of autonomous mines disguised as ice chunks and small asteroids. Each mine carried a small nuclear warhead and basic sensors that could distinguish between civilian and military vessels. The mines began moving on silent thrusters, repositioning themselves along the alien fleet's projected course. It would take time. Space was vast and precise positioning was crucial, but Chen had 72 hours before the aliens reached Neptune. Plenty of time to prepare a proper welcome. She also ordered the deployment of humanity's hidden weapons, deep space monitoring stations that could transform into missile platforms, civilian mining vessels in the asteroid belt that carried military-grade railguns hidden in their cargo holds. Even the scientific research station on Pluto had a role to play, its powerful communications array ready to jam enemy signals. Humanity had learned to prepare for war even in times of peace. Every orbital facility had weapons. Every ship carried more than was listed in official manifests. Every installation had evacuation plans and self-destruct protocols. The Belt Wars had taught them to never be caught defenseless. The alien fleet reached the minefield perimeter 68 hours after entering the system. Zural stood in his command center, monitoring the advance with satisfaction. The humans had made no move to intercept his forces. Their ships remained clustered around the gas giant Neptune, a defensive posture that suggested fear rather than confidence. "Scan results?" he asked. 30 human vessels detected, his sensor officer reported. Primitive fusion drives, kinetic weapons, nuclear armaments, no energy shields detected, no advanced propulsion systems. Zural felt the last of his concerns fade. These humans were even less advanced than initial reports suggested. Their ships looked like they had been welded together from industrial components. "Crude, ugly, and undoubtedly fragile. Continue advance. Prepare to demonstrate our superiority. Target one of their orbital installations." The fleet pressed forward. Then the first mine detonated. The nuclear explosion blossomed in the darkness, a brief sun born and dying in seconds. The blast caught a Valdrine destroyer on its port side, overwhelming its shields with thermal and kinetic energy. The destroyer's hull cracked, atmosphere venting into space. Before Zural could react, 6 more mines detonated in rapid succession. The carefully timed explosions created a cascade of destruction, each blast driving debris and radiation into the path of following ships. 2 more destroyers took critical damage. A cruiser lost its primary propulsion. "Evasive maneuvers," Zural roared. "Full shields. Scan for additional threats." The Valdrine fleet scattered, their precise formation breaking apart. Sensors swept the surrounding space, detecting hundreds of objects that could be mines, asteroids, or ice chunks. In the outer system's cluttered environment, distinguishing between them was nearly impossible without active scanning, and active scanning gave away positions. "Report," Zural demanded. 3 destroyers severely damaged, 1 possibly destroyed. The cruiser Relentless has lost main power. The mines were nuclear devices, Admiral, crude but effective in this environment. Zural felt something he had not experienced in over a century: surprise. The humans had mined their own outer system. They had weaponized the natural debris field. It was a tactic born of desperation and cunning, and it had worked. Continue scanning. Plot a safe course through the minefield. And prepare for... The human fleet attacked before he could finish the sentence. 30 ships accelerated from Neptune orbit at maximum burn, their fusion drives blazing like small stars. They did not advance in formation. They did not follow any conventional tactical pattern. Instead, they scattered across 3-dimensional space, approaching from multiple vectors simultaneously. "Incoming missiles!" the sensor officer shouted. Hundreds of them. The humans had launched their entire arsenal in one massive salvo. Missiles crossed the distance between fleets at incredible velocity. Most were nuclear warheads. Some were kinetic kill vehicles, simple masses of dense metal accelerated to relativistic speeds. Others were electronic warfare packages designed to jam and confuse. Valdrine point defense systems engaged, destroying dozens of missiles, but the sheer volume overwhelmed their targeting computers. Nuclear explosions erupted throughout the fleet. Kinetic projectiles punched through shields that had been designed to stop energy weapons, not solid masses traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. Chen watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. The aliens had better technology, but they had underestimated human creativity. Humanity's weapons were primitive by the standards of galactic civilization, but they were effective. Nuclear weapons did not care about energy shields. Kinetic projectiles relied on simple physics, and missiles could be fired in quantities that overwhelmed sophisticated defenses. "All ships, weapons free," she ordered. "Concentrate fire on damaged vessels. Don't let them regroup." The UEDF ships closed to railgun range and opened fire. Solid slugs of depleted uranium accelerated to hypersonic velocities, striking alien ships with devastating force. The aliens' shields absorbed the first impacts, but sustained fire from multiple angles began to penetrate. A Valdrine destroyer exploded, its reactor breaching under sustained assault. Another lost power and began tumbling through space. The humans pressed their attack with ferocity that bordered on recklessness. accepting damage to their own ships to maximize the punishment they inflicted. Zural watched his neat invasion force dissolve into chaos. 3 destroyers lost, 5 ships heavily damaged, and the humans showed no sign of breaking off their attack. They fought like beings possessed, sacrificing ships to destroy his vessels. One human ship, its hull breached and leaking atmosphere, deliberately rammed a Valdrine cruiser. The impact shattered both vessels, sending debris cascading through the formation. The humans had turned their own dying ship into a weapon. "All vessels, full retreat," Zural ordered. "Fall back to Rally Point Epsilon." The Valdrine fleet withdrew, their superior speed allowing them to break contact. The human ships pursued for a time before breaking off, having inflicted far more damage than they sustained. Chen stood on her bridge surveying the damage reports. 5 ships lost, 7 heavily damaged, nearly 3,000 personnel dead. But the aliens had retreated. Humanity had won its first battle against an interstellar empire. "Send a message to the fleet," she said quietly. "Well done. Repair what you can and prepare for round 2. They'll be back, and they won't underestimate us again." Commander Webb approached her, his face showing both exhilaration and concern. "Admiral, we hurt them, but we used most of our ammunition in that engagement, and their ships are still superior to ours. When they come back with reinforcements—" "When they come back," Chen interrupted, "we'll have prepared something new. Humans are adaptable, Commander. It's what we do best." Halfway across the system, aboard the Inexorable, Zural composed a message to Supreme Strategos Kelix. It was the first retreat message the Valdrine military had sent in 3,000 years. "Supreme Strategos, initial conquest of Target 848, has encountered unexpected resistance. Request reinforcement fleet. These humans fight with unusual ferocity and tactical creativity. Standard invasion protocols are inadequate." He paused, considering his words carefully before adding the final line. "They do not fight like prey. They fight like predators defending their territory. Recommend reclassification to Tier 2 threat level." The message transmitted across the stars. In Sol system, both sides began preparing for the next engagement. The Valdrine with grim determination to correct their error. Humanity with desperate hope that they could repeat their unlikely victory. Admiral Chen stood alone in her quarters that night, looking at the images of the dead. 3,000 faces, 3,000 people who had died under her command. She committed each name to memory as she always did. Then she turned to her desk and began planning. The aliens would return. They would bring more ships, better tactics, and a determination to avenge their losses. Humanity needed to be ready. She opened a file labeled Scorched Earth Protocols and began to read. If the aliens wanted Earth, humanity would make them pay for every meter of space with blood and fire. That was what humans did. That was what they had always done. The war for survival had begun. Supreme Strategos Kelix reviewed the battle reports from Sol System with something approaching disbelief. In 3,000 years of conquest, the Valdrine had never suffered such losses in an initial engagement. 8 ships destroyed or crippled, thousands of soldiers lost, and worst of all, retreat. The word tasted bitter even in his synthesized thoughts. The Valdrine Council of Masters demanded answers. How could a Tier 4 civilization inflict such damage? How could primitive nuclear weapons and kinetic projectiles overcome Valdrine superiority? Kelix had no satisfactory explanations. The humans had simply fought with a savagery and creativity that defied standard tactical models, but embarrassment would not stand. The Dominion's reputation depended on swift, decisive conquests. If word spread that a primitive species had repelled the Valdrine, it could encourage resistance throughout the Empire. Subject races might begin to hope. That hope could not be allowed to take root. "Assemble the full invasion fleet," Kelix ordered. 400 warships, 4 million ground troops. I will command this operation personally. Intelligence Prime Veshka manifested her avatar in the command center, her data streams flickering with concern. "Supreme Strategos, such a force has not been assembled since the conquest of the Jannar Collective. Are you certain this is necessary?" "The humans have made fools of us," Kelix replied coldly. "We will show them what happens to species that resist the inevitable. We will show the entire galaxy that the Valdrine do not accept defeat." The fleet assembled over the next 3 weeks. 400 of the Dominion's finest warships gathered at the staging point. Troop transports loaded with soldiers eager to erase the stain of the first defeat. Supply vessels carrying enough ordnance to reduce a dozen worlds to rubble. It was a force capable of conquering entire sectors, all focused on a single primitive system. Zural remained in command of tactical operations, though the defeat at Neptune hung over him like a shadow. He had studied the battle recordings obsessively, analyzing every moment of the engagement. The humans had used their environment as a weapon. They had accepted catastrophic losses to inflict disproportionate damage. They had fought with coordination that suggested extensive combat experience. Most troubling was their willingness to sacrifice. That ramming attack had been deliberate. The human ship's crew had chosen death to destroy a Valdrine cruiser. What kind of species did that? What kind of military doctrine accepted such losses as acceptable? Zural brought his concerns to Kellex, but the Supreme Strategos dismissed them. Their sacrifice was born of desperation, not strength. When faced with overwhelming force, they will break like all the others. The fleet entered Sol system in a display of power meant to crush human morale. 400 ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, their weapons charged and shields at maximum. They ignored the mined outer system, simply overwhelming the defenses with numbers and firepower. Mines detonated against shields, but 400 ships could absorb losses that 40 could not. Kellex broadcast a new ultimatum, transmitted directly to Earth on all frequencies. His biomechanical form appeared on every screen capable of receiving the signal. Billions of humans saw his face as he spoke. Humans of Sol system. You have demonstrated courage and capability. The Valdrine respect strength, but you cannot prevail against us. We have brought a fleet sufficient to reduce your worlds to ash. We offer one final chance for peaceful integration. Surrender now and your species will be preserved. Resist and we will show no mercy. Admiral Chen received the transmission aboard the Indomitable, which had been repaired and re-equipped in Earth orbit. She watched Kellex deliver his ultimatum, studying his expression, his body language, the way he held himself. He was confident. Perhaps too confident. She composed her response carefully, knowing billions would hear her words. Supreme Strategos Kellex, you've brought 400 ships to conquer 30. You've assembled millions of soldiers to fight billions. You've declared us primitive, yet you needed to increase your forces tenfold after we beat you once. I think you're the one who's scared, and you should be. She cut the transmission and turned to her staff. Activate Manhattan Protocol. It's time to show them what we've really been building. For 50 years, since the formation of the United Earth Defense Force, humanity had prepared for this possibility. The governments of Earth had agreed on one thing. If hostile aliens ever arrived, humanity would not be helpless. Enormous resources had been poured into secret projects. Weapons that broke treaties, ships that didn't officially exist, installations hidden in the depths of space. The Manhattan Protocol had been named after the secret project that built humanity's first atomic weapons. Like its namesake, it represented humanity's willingness to do whatever necessary for survival. Deep in the Oort cloud, 40 massive vessels activated their systems. They were not warships in the conventional sense. They were mobile weapons platforms, each larger than the UEDF's biggest carrier. These ships had been built over decades using resources mined from the outer system. They had been constructed in secret, their existence known only to the highest levels of Earth's government. Each carried experimental weapons that human engineers had developed by pushing every physical law to its limit. Antimatter torpedoes. Bombs that contained tiny amounts of matter and antimatter separated by magnetic fields. When the fields collapsed, the resulting explosion released energy that made nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. Directed EMP cannons, electromagnetic pulse weapons scaled up to disable entire fleets, AI-guided missile swarms, thousands of small missiles controlled by artificial intelligence that could think and adapt faster than biological reflexes, plasma lances, superheated matter accelerated to relativistic speeds, capable of cutting through any known material. The 40 ships, collectively named the Retribution Fleet, began their burn toward the inner system. They would take time to arrive. Space was vast and even military vessels could not cross system distances instantly, but they were coming, and they represented humanity's true defensive capability. Meanwhile, the Valdrine fleet began its assault on Mars. The Red Planet had been humanity's first extraterrestrial colony, home to 2 million people living in interconnected domes and underground facilities. It was also heavily fortified. The colonists had learned from Earth's history that borders needed defending. Kellex expected Mars to fall within days. The Valdrine bombarded the planet's surface installations from orbit, their weapons gouging craters in the red soil. They landed ground forces at 3 strategic locations, intending to seize the main population centers. What they found instead was hell. The Martian colonists were descendants of engineers, miners, and scientists. They knew their planet better than anyone. They had turned their entire colony into a fortress. Every dome was a bunker. Every tunnel system was a kill zone. Every piece of mining equipment had been weaponized. Valdrine soldiers advanced into what appeared to be abandoned facilities, only to find themselves trapped in collapsing tunnels rigged with explosives. Mining drones, normally used to extract ore, had been fitted with improvised weapons and sent against invading forces. Industrial lasers meant for cutting rock were repurposed to cut through armor. The colonists refused to surrender. They fought room by room, corridor by corridor. When Valdrine forces finally captured a dome, they found it had been evacuated and rigged to explode. The colonists retreated deeper underground, into tunnel systems too narrow for Valdrine assault vehicles. Zural watched his ground forces struggle with growing frustration. They were taking casualties at a rate that should not be possible against a technologically inferior enemy. The humans were using their knowledge of the terrain, their industrial equipment, and their apparent disregard for their own safety to inflict terrible losses. "Recommend orbital bombardment," one of his officers suggested. "We can collapse their tunnel systems from orbit." "That would kill the civilian population," Zural objected. "The Supreme Strategos wants this world intact. Then we must accept a prolonged ground campaign." Zural had no better options. The Valdrine had never encountered defenders this tenacious. Every military doctrine assumed that civilians would surrender to protect themselves. But these humans seemed to have no such instinct. They fought as if they had already accepted death and decided to take as many invaders with them as possible. While Mars burned, the Valdrine fleet moved on Earth's orbital defenses. The planet was surrounded by a network of space stations, weapons platforms, and satellite systems. Kellex expected to sweep them aside with overwhelming firepower. Instead, he found himself in a grinding battle of attrition. The orbital platforms had been built with redundancy and resilience in mind. They could absorb tremendous damage and continue functioning. Their weapons, while primitive, were numerous and well-positioned. Human defenders used the orbital debris field to their advantage, hiding weapons platforms among defunct satellites and space junk. Valdrine ships found themselves under fire from unexpected angles. Small human vessels, barely more than engines with weapons attached, made suicide runs against larger ships. The battle for Earth's orbital space became a brutal slugging match. The Valdrine advanced slowly, destroying platforms one by one. But each victory cost time and resources, and Earth's defenders kept fighting. Admiral Chen coordinated the defense from multiple locations, moving constantly to avoid becoming a target. She had divided her command staff across several stations, ensuring that no single strike could decapitate Earth's leadership. She watched the tactical displays, counting losses, calculating odds, and waiting for the moment when her secret weapons would arrive. "Admiral," Commander Webb reported, his face appearing on her screen. "The Valdrine have breached orbital platform 7. Defenders are falling back to platform 8. "Tell platform 7 to execute Gamma Protocol," Chen ordered quietly. Webb's face went pale. "Admiral, there are still 300 personnel on that platform." "I know. Execute the protocol." Platform 7 detonated 10 minutes later, its fusion reactor overloading in a carefully controlled explosion. The blast took out 2 Valdrine cruisers that had been closing in on Platform 8. 300 humans died to kill thousands of aliens. Chen added their names to the list she kept. The list was growing longer every day. Tens of thousands of names. Soon it would be hundreds of thousands. She wondered how long her memory could hold them all. Kellex watched the battle unfold with growing unease. 6 weeks had passed since the invasion began. Mars still resisted. Earth's orbital defenses remained intact. His fleet had destroyed hundreds of targets, but the humans kept fighting. They refused to acknowledge when they were beaten. "Status report," he demanded. 73 ships lost or heavily damaged, his tactical officer reported. Ground forces on Mars have secured only 30% of the colony. Human resistance shows no signs of breaking. They are using tactics we have never encountered. Suicide attacks, booby traps, false surrenders. "How long until Mars is fully secured?" "At current rates, possibly 6 months. The humans have extensive underground facilities. They can retreat indefinitely, 6 months, for a single colony. Kellex felt the weight of 3,000 years of easy victories pressing down on him. This should not be happening. The humans should have surrendered after the first week. They should have seen the futility of resistance. Then came the alert that changed everything. Supreme Strategos! New contacts detected. 40 large vessels approaching from the outer system. Mass estimates put them at dreadnought class or larger. Kellex studied the sensor data in disbelief. Where had 40 dreadnoughts come from? Human industry could not build ships of that size without detection. Yet there they were, burning toward the inner system at maximum military acceleration. Intelligence Prime Veshka, he called. Explain this. Veshka's avatar materialized, her data streams flickering rapidly. Analysis suggests these vessels were constructed over an extended period in the Oort cloud, beyond our scanning range. They represent a strategic reserve the humans kept hidden. Supreme Strategos, the humans planned for this contingency. They expected invasion. They prepared for it. Kellex felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Fear, not for himself, but for the success of this operation. He had brought 400 ships to conquer a primitive species. Now that species was revealing hidden weapons and hidden fleets. What else had they prepared? Admiral Chen received the signal from the Retribution fleet and allowed herself a small smile. All stations, this is Chen. Hold your positions. Reinforcements are arriving. Show these invaders what happens when they threaten Earth. The message spread throughout Sol system. Every defender, every soldier, every colonist fighting in Mars's tunnels heard it. Reinforcements were coming. Hope, which had been fading under weeks of brutal combat, flared back to life. The Valdrine had brought their empire's might to crush humanity. But humanity had been preparing for this fight for 50 years. And they were far from finished. The real war was about to begin. The Retribution fleet emerged from the darkness of the Oort cloud like vengeful gods. 40 massive vessels, each one a testament to human determination and engineering prowess, accelerated toward the inner system. Their hulls were scarred from decades of hidden construction, their weapons systems glowing with barely contained power. Admiral Chen watched their approach on her tactical display with something approaching awe. She had known about the Manhattan Protocol ships, but seeing them in action was different. These were not the sleek, elegant vessels of science fiction. They were brutal, functional machines built for one purpose: to destroy anything that threatened humanity's survival. Supreme Strategos Kellex studied the incoming fleet with cold calculation. His initial assessment had been catastrophically wrong. These humans were not a primitive species stumbling into space. They were a militarized civilization that had spent generations preparing for the possibility of hostile contact. Every resource estimate had been understated. Every capability assessment had been incomplete. Fleet disposition, Kellex ordered. Prepare to engage the incoming vessels. His tactical officer hesitated. Supreme Strategos, our forces are already engaged with orbital defenses and ground operations. Redirecting ships to meet this new threat will weaken our other operations. The orbital defenses have held for 6 weeks against overwhelming force, Kellex replied. These new vessels represent the true threat. Concentrate our heaviest units to meet them. 200 Valdrine warships broke off from the siege of Earth's orbital space and formed a defensive screen. The Retribution fleet did not slow. They came on at full military acceleration, their powerful drives pushing them to velocities that strained the limits of human engineering. Then they opened fire. The antimatter torpedoes crossed the distance in seconds. Each torpedo carried only a few grams of antimatter, but those few grams contained enough energy to annihilate anything they touched. The first salvo struck the Valdrine formation like the hammer of an angry god. 5 warships simply ceased to exist, converted to expanding clouds of plasma and debris. Kellex watched the destruction with growing horror. Antimatter weapons. The humans had somehow mastered antimatter containment and weaponized it. His shields, designed to absorb energy weapons and kinetic impacts, were useless against matter-antimatter annihilation. All ships evasive maneuvers. Maximum dispersal. The Valdrine fleet scattered, abandoning their neat formations. But the human ships did not slow or maneuver to follow. Instead, they deployed their secondary weapons. Thousands of small missiles erupted from launch bays, each one guided by artificial intelligence sophisticated enough to think, adapt, and coordinate with its siblings. The AI swarms divided into hunter-killer packs, pursuing Valdrine ships through the chaos of battle. Point defense systems destroyed hundreds, but thousands more pressed the attack. They learned from each destroyed drone, sharing tactical data instantaneously. They adapted to Valdrine defensive patterns in real time. Zoral found himself fighting a battle unlike anything in his 200 conquests. The enemy missiles were not simply following ballistic trajectories. They were thinking, planning, coordinating. When he maneuvered to avoid one group, another was already in position to intercept him. His ship's defensive systems could not keep up with the rate of adaptation. Tactical assessment, he demanded. The missiles are using distributed intelligence, his sensor officer reported. Each drone is relatively simple, but collectively they function as a sophisticated tactical system. They are overwhelming our defenses through sheer volume and coordination. A pack of 20 drones broke through the Inexorable's point defense. They struck in sequence, each impact precisely timed to maximize damage. The ship's shields collapsed under the sustained assault. Hull breaches erupted across 3 decks. Zoral's command center shook with the impact of internal explosions. Damage report. Primary weapons offline. Shield generators at 20%. Hull breaches on multiple decks. We have lost 40% of point defense capability. Zoral made a decision he never thought he would face. Signal the fleet. General retreat. Fall back to rally point beyond the system's gravity well. The Valdrine fleet withdrew in disorder, leaving behind 50 destroyed ships and dozens more too damaged to jump to faster-than-light speeds. The Retribution fleet pursued them to the edge of Sol system, inflicting further casualties before breaking off the pursuit. Admiral Chen watched the alien retreat with grim satisfaction. The siege of Earth had been broken. The invaders were fleeing. Humanity had won its second victory against an interstellar empire, but she knew this was not the end. The Valdrine would return. They had to. An empire built on conquest could not afford to accept defeat from a species they had classified as primitive. This war would continue until one side or the other was destroyed. Status of all forces, she ordered. Commander Webb pulled up the reports. Retribution fleet sustained minimal damage. Conventional fleet has 32% losses. Mars colony defenders have lost half their population, but still control 60% of the underground facilities. Orbital defenses are at 40% capacity. Total casualties across all forces. 370,000 dead, 800,000 wounded. Chen closed her eyes briefly. 370,000 names to add to her list. The number was becoming too large to comprehend. But they had survived. Earth still stood. Mars still resisted. And now humanity possessed the means to take the fight to the enemy. She opened a channel to the United Earth government. The Security Council appeared on her screen, their faces showing relief mixed with exhaustion. 6 weeks of siege had taken its toll on everyone. Admiral Chen, the Secretary General said, "You've achieved the impossible. The aliens are retreating." "For now," Chen replied. "But they'll be back. We hurt them badly, but we didn't destroy them. They still have hundreds of ships out there. An entire empire to draw upon. We need to end this threat permanently. What are you suggesting?" "We take the offensive. We follow them back to their territory. We make them understand that attacking humanity carries consequences." The council chamber erupted in argument. Some supported immediate counterattack. Others advocated for strengthening defenses and preparing for the next invasion. A few suggested attempting diplomatic contact now that humanity had proven its strength. Chen listened to the debate for several minutes before interrupting. "With respect, we don't have the luxury of extended debate. The Valdrine have seen our capabilities. They know about the Retribution fleet now. They'll be developing countermeasures. If we wait for them to return on their terms, we lose our advantage." "But Admiral," one counselor objected, "we barely survived their attack. How can we possibly take the fight to them?" "Because they made a critical mistake," Chen explained. "They showed us where they came from. Our sensors tracked their faster-than-light entry and exit vectors. We know the direction to their territory, and we captured some of their technology. Our scientists are studying it right now. We can reverse engineer their faster-than-light drives. We can reach their space." The debate continued for hours, but eventually the council authorized what became known as Operation Boomerang. Humanity would strike back at the Valdrine Empire. They would show the galaxy that Earth was not prey. They were predators defending their territory. The next 3 months were a frenzy of preparation. Human engineers worked around the clock to understand Valdrine technology. The captured ships from the first battle provided invaluable data. The faster-than-light drives were based on principles human physics had theorized but never successfully implemented. With working examples to study, human scientists cracked the fundamental equations. The Retribution fleet was refitted with faster-than-light capability. 20 more ships of conventional design were upgraded as well. Earth's shipyards worked at maximum capacity, building new vessels using lessons learned from the battles. The fleet that assembled for Operation Boomerang numbered 90 ships, a fraction of the Valdrine force, but equipped with weapons that had proven their effectiveness. Admiral Chen took command of the operation personally, transferring her flag to the Retribution fleet's lead vessel, renamed Humanity's Vengeance. The name was not subtle, but Chen had long since abandoned subtlety. The Valdrine had tried to conquer Earth. Now Earth would show them the price of that decision. The fleet departed Sol System 6 months after the siege ended. As they accelerated toward the faster-than-light jump point, Chen addressed the crews. "We're about to do something humanity has never done before. We're going to take the fight beyond our home system. We're going to attack an interstellar empire on its own territory. This is dangerous. Many of us won't come back. But we do this so that Earth will never face another invasion. We do this so that future generations can live without fear. We do this because we're human, and humans don't wait for threats to come to them." The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speeds, leaving Sol System behind. They followed the vectors the Valdrine had used, traveling through the strange realm where normal physics broke down. The journey took 3 weeks, time spent in final preparations and tactical planning. They emerged in a system that intelligence analysts had designated as Valdrine Border System Gamma. 3 planets orbited a red dwarf star. 2 of them showed signs of industrial activity. Valdrine installations dotted the surfaces, mining operations, military bases, and what appeared to be shipyards. Chen studied the tactical display. Target the military installations first. Civilian infrastructure is not to be touched unless it presents a direct threat. We're not conquerors. We're sending a message. The human fleet attacked with the same ferocity they had shown defending Sol. Antimatter torpedoes reduced Valdrine military bases to craters. AI swarms overwhelmed defensive systems. Plasma lances cut through orbital stations. Within 6 hours, the system's military capability had been eliminated. Chen broadcast a message across all Valdrine frequencies. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. You invaded our home. We have responded in kind. We will continue to respond until you understand that humanity is not to be threatened. Leave us alone and we leave you alone. Attack us again and we will reduce your empire to rubble. The choice is yours." The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speeds before Valdrine reinforcements could arrive. They struck 2 more border systems over the next month, each time destroying military targets and broadcasting the same message. The Valdrine Empire, which had never faced offensive action in 3,000 years, found itself under attack from a species they had tried to conquer. The effect on Valdrine territory was immediate and catastrophic. Subject races that had lived under Valdrine rule for generations saw the attacks as proof that resistance was possible. If humans could strike the Dominion with impunity, perhaps others could as well. Rebellions erupted on 12 worlds. Species that had been conquered decades or centuries ago suddenly refused to obey. They saw footage of human attacks broadcasted across the galactic communication networks. They saw the mighty Valdrine military retreating, their bases burning, their ships fleeing. Kellex found himself fighting a war on multiple fronts. Human raiders struck border systems randomly, impossible to predict or intercept. Subject races rebelled, requiring forces to be diverted for suppression. The empire that had stood unchallenged for 3,000 years was cracking. He called an emergency session of the Dominion Council. The masters appeared in holographic form, their biomechanical features twisted with anger and confusion. "How has this happened?" one demanded. "How has a single primitive species brought our empire to the edge of chaos?" Kellex had no good answers. "The humans fight differently than any species we have encountered. They accept casualties that would break other civilizations. They adapt rapidly. They weaponize everything, including their own mortality, and they refuse to acknowledge defeat. Then we must destroy them completely," another master declared. "Assemble every available ship. Reduce their homeworld to ash. Make an example that will terrify every subject race in the Dominion." But Intelligence Prime Veshka intervened. her avatar manifesting in the council chamber. That option is no longer viable. The humans have distributed their military capabilities throughout their system. Destroying Earth would not eliminate their fleet. It would only enrage them further. And our intelligence suggests they have contingency plans for exactly such an attack. What kind of contingency? Scorched Earth protocols. If Earth falls, their remaining forces have orders to wage total war against us. They will target civilian populations, industrial centers, and infrastructure throughout our territory. They have already demonstrated willingness to accept their own extinction if it means taking us with them. The council fell silent. They had never faced an enemy like this. An enemy that would rather die than submit. An enemy that turned defeat into motivation for greater violence. An enemy that could not be conquered because they refused to accept conquest as a possibility. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of humanity's vengeance, reviewing reports of the rebellion spreading through Valdrine space. 12 systems in revolt, more showing signs of unrest. The Empire was collapsing from within, weakened by the simple demonstration that the Valdrine could be beaten. Admiral, Commander Webb reported, intelligence indicates the Valdrine are pulling back forces from multiple sectors. They're consolidating around their core worlds. Chen nodded slowly. They're going defensive, good. Keep hitting their border systems. Keep showing the galaxy that resistance is possible. And prepare the fleet for extended operations. We're not going home until this threat is neutralized. The war continued for another year. Human raiders struck across Valdrine territory, never staying long enough to be caught. Always hitting where defenses were weakest. The rebellion spread, consuming more and more of the Empire's resources. The Valdrine, who had conquered 847 worlds, found themselves unable to hold their territory against determined resistance. And through it all, Earth remained free. Mars was rebuilding. The outer system installations were being fortified. Humanity had paid a terrible price, but they had survived. More than survived. They had proven that they could not be conquered. The galaxy was learning a new truth. Humanity was not prey, and anyone who forgot that lesson would learn it the hard way. 2 years after the first Valdrine ship entered Sol system, Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of humanity's vengeance and looked at the tactical display showing 10,000 ships. 10,000 vessels bearing the marks of dozens of different species, all united by a single purpose. They had come to end the Valdrine dominion forever. The journey to this moment had been long and bloody. Human raiders had struck Valdrine territory for 18 months. Each attack carefully calculated to inflict maximum damage while minimizing their own losses. But the raids had done more than destroy military installations. They had sent a message that echoed across the galaxy. The Valdrine could be beaten. The empire that had seemed invincible for 3,000 years could bleed. That message had found fertile ground. The 12 species that initially rebelled had been joined by dozens more. Former subjects of the Dominion who had spent generations under Valdrine rule suddenly remembered what freedom felt like. They saw human ships striking with impunity. They saw Valdrine forces retreating. They saw an empire crumbling. Many of these rebels had reached out to Earth seeking weapons and tactical advice. Chen had provided both. Human engineers had taught them how to turn civilian equipment into weapons. Human veterans had shared lessons learned from centuries of warfare. Most importantly, humans had shared their philosophy of resistance. Never surrender. Never stop fighting. Accept any sacrifice necessary for freedom. Now these rebel fleets had gathered at a rendezvous point 3 light years from Valdros Prime, the Valdrine homeworld. They came in ships of every description. Converted freighters bristling with improvised weapons. Ancient warships pulled from museums and refitted. Sleek modern vessels built in secret shipyards. The fleet was a chaotic mixture of technologies and tactics, but it was united by determination. Chen had spent weeks coordinating with the rebel commanders, learning their capabilities and limitations. Some species were natural warriors. Others were scientists or traders who had never imagined they would fight. But all of them had suffered under Valdrine rule, and all of them wanted justice. The human contingent remained the core of the fleet. The Retribution fleet had been reinforced with 60 more vessels built in Earth's shipyards. These new ships incorporated everything humanity had learned from 2 years of warfare. They carried antimatter weapons, AI swarms, plasma lances, and kinetic kill vehicles. They were brutal, efficient killing machines crewed by veterans who had faced the Valdrine and survived. Commander Webb approached Chen, his face showing the strain of 2 years of constant combat. He had aged a decade in that time. They all had. War consumed youth and left only hard edges behind. Admiral, all fleet elements report ready for jump to target system. Rebel commanders are awaiting your order. Chen took a moment to look at the faces on her tactical display. Humans, yes, but also a dozen other species. Beings with scales, fur, exoskeletons, and forms that defied easy description, all of them waiting for her signal to begin the final battle. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. This is Admiral Chen. In a few moments we will jump to Valdros Prime. We will blockade the Valdrine homeworld. We will show them what it feels like to be trapped, to be threatened, to face extinction. But we will not massacre civilians. We will not become the monsters we're fighting. We will give them one chance to end this peacefully. If they refuse, we will do what is necessary. All ships prepare for jump. The fleet activated their faster-than-light drives in coordinated sequence. 10,000 ships vanished from normal space, traveling through the strange realm between stars. The journey took 3 hours, time spent in tense silence as crews prepared for the battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy. They emerged in Valdros system in a display of power that had never been seen before. 10,000 ships appeared simultaneously around the Valdrine homeworld, their weapons charged and shields active. They formed a perfect sphere around the planet, a cage of metal and energy that nothing could penetrate. On Valdros Prime, Supreme Strategos Kelix watched the arrival of the fleet with something approaching despair. He stood in the planetary command center, surrounded by the masters of the Dominion Council. They had gathered here when it became clear that the Empire was collapsing. Now they watched their enemy arrive in overwhelming force. How many ships? One master asked, his voice hollow. Initial count suggests 10,000 vessels, a sensor officer reported. Composition includes human warships and vessels from multiple former subject species. They have positioned themselves in a complete blockade formation. Nothing can enter or leave the system. Kellic studied the tactical display showing the sphere of enemy ships. It was perfect positioning. Any attempt to break through would expose Valdrine forces to fire from multiple angles. And the fleet was too large. Even if the Dominion assembled every remaining warship, they could not match these numbers. How did this happen? Another master demanded. How did we lose our empire? Kelix finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of certainty collapsing. We believed our own myths. We thought technological superiority was enough. We thought fear and force could hold an empire together. We were wrong. The humans showed every species we conquered that resistance was possible. They taught them that freedom was worth dying for. And now they're here to finish what we started. Admiral Chen's face appeared on every screen in the Valdrine Command Center. She looked older than when the war had started. Her hair had gone gray. Lines of stress marked her face, but her eyes were hard as steel. Supreme Strategos Kellic, she said. 2 years ago you tried to conquer humanity. You brought 400 ships to subjugate my people. You failed. We destroyed your fleet, broke your siege, and took the war to your territory. Now we're here at your homeworld with 10,000 ships, not to conquer, not to subjugate, but to end this war permanently. She paused, letting her words sink in. You have one choice. Surrender unconditionally. Dissolve the Dominion. Grant independence to every species you've conquered. Reduce your military to defensive forces only. Accept oversight to ensure you never again threaten another species. Do this and you survive. Refuse and we will show you what humanity is capable of when we stop holding back. The transmission ended. The fleet waited in silence, maintaining their blockade positions. They did not fire. They did not advance. They simply waited, an immovable constellation of judgment surrounding the Valdrine homeworld. Inside the command center, the masters argued. Some advocated for fighting to the last. Others suggested negotiation. A few proposed activating hidden weapons, superweapons that had been developed in secret. But Kellic knew the truth. They had lost, not because the humans were stronger, though their weapons were terrifyingly effective. They had lost because they had awakened something in the galaxy. Hope. The belief that empires could fall, and freedom could be won. If we fight, Kellic said quietly, interrupting the arguments, they will destroy us. Not just our military. They will reduce this world to ash. The humans have already demonstrated their willingness to accept catastrophic losses to achieve their objectives. They will sacrifice their entire fleet if necessary to ensure we never threaten anyone again. So we surrender, a master asked bitterly. We give up 3,000 years of dominion? We survive, Kellex replied. We accept that the galaxy has changed, that our way of conquest is no longer viable, that we must adapt or face extinction. The debate continued for 6 hours while the human-led fleet maintained their silent vigil. Finally, inevitably, the masters reached their conclusion. Valdros Prime transmitted a message to the blockading fleet. We accept your terms. We request Parley to negotiate the details of our surrender. Admiral Chen received the message with careful neutrality. Surrender was a beginning, not an ending. The hard work of building a lasting peace would take years, but at least the killing could stop. Commander Webb, assemble a delegation. We're going to the Valdrine flagship. And get me a security team. I'm not taking any chances. 6 hours later, Chen stepped aboard the Valdrine flagship Eternal Triumph. She wore full military dress uniform, medals from 2 years of war gleaming on her chest. She was accompanied by 12 security personnel, weapons visible but not drawn. Behind her, projected holographically, were representatives from a dozen rebel species. Kellex met her in the flagship's conference chamber. He looked diminished somehow, his biomechanical form seeming less imposing without the weight of Empire behind him. He stood as Chen entered, a gesture of respect that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. Admiral Chen, he said, you have achieved what no species has accomplished in 3,000 years. You have defeated the Valdrine Dominion. We survived you, Chen corrected. There's a difference. We didn't want this war. We just wanted to be left alone. You forced us to fight, so we fought. And we kept fighting until you understood that some species cannot be conquered. She moved to the conference table and pulled up a holographic document. These are the terms of surrender. Non-negotiable. The Valdrine Dominion is dissolved effective immediately. All subject species are granted full independence. Your military is reduced to 10% of current strength. Restricted to defensive operations only. You will pay reparations to species harmed by your conquests. You will submit to oversight by a council of free species to ensure compliance with these terms. Kellex reviewed the terms slowly. They were harsh but not vindictive. The Valdrine would survive as a species. They would keep their homeworld and their civilian infrastructure. They would not be enslaved or punished beyond what was necessary to prevent future aggression. Why? Kellex asked suddenly. Why did you not simply destroy us? You have the power. Your fleet could reduce this world to rubble in hours. Why offer mercy to an enemy who showed you none? Chen considered the question carefully. Because we're not conquerors. We're survivors. We fight when threatened, but we don't seek to dominate. And because someone needs to break the cycle. For 3,000 years you conquered world after world. You created an empire built on force and fear. That empire is gone now. What replaces it depends on the choices we make here. She leaned forward, her eyes meeting Kellex's 3 optical sensors. I want the galaxy to remember this moment. Not because humanity was the strongest, but because we proved that freedom is worth fighting for, that empires built on conquest will eventually face species that refuse to submit, that there's a difference between victory and survival. Kellex was silent for a long moment. Then he extended his biomechanical hand. We accept your terms, Admiral Chen. The Valdrine Dominion surrenders unconditionally. Chen took his hand. The gesture was symbolic, recorded by dozens of cameras and broadcast across the galaxy. The moment when 3,000 years of conquest ended with a handshake. The next 6 months were spent implementing the surrender terms. The Valdrine military was demobilized. 847 systems were granted independence. Rebel fleets returned to their homeworlds as liberators rather than insurgents. The galaxy began the slow process of healing from 3 millennia of Valdrine dominance. Humanity's role in the new galactic order was debated extensively. Some species wanted Earth to lead a new federation, to replace the Dominion with something better. Chen refused. She had no interest in building an empire, even a benevolent one. Instead, humanity helped establish the Accord of Free Worlds, a loose confederation based on mutual defense and cooperation rather than domination. Any species could join, any species could leave. There were no subject races, no enforced tributes, no conquered territories. Just free beings working together for common interests. The Retribution fleet was not disbanded. Instead, it became the core of something new, the Vigil, a multinational defense force dedicated to ensuring that no species would face extinction alone. Ships from dozens worlds joined. including reformed Valdrine vessels crewed by those who wanted to atone for their empire's crimes. Admiral Sarah Chen retired from active military service 5 years after the siege of Seoul. She was 68 years old and had spent the last 7 years in constant warfare. She had earned her rest. But before she left military life behind, she returned to Earth one final time. She stood before the Memorial of Resistance, a monument built to honor all those who had died defending humanity. The memorial was a vast wall bearing hundreds of thousands of names. Chen had tried to remember them all, but there were too many. The human mind could not hold so much grief. She placed her hand on the wall, feeling the etched letters beneath her palm. Around her, other veterans stood in silence, each lost in their own memories. The war had cost humanity dearly. 370,000 dead in the siege alone, hundreds of thousands more in the long campaign that followed. Mars had lost half its population. Earth's orbital infrastructure had taken a decade to rebuild, but they had survived. They had proven that humanity could not be conquered, that Earth would stand against any threat, that free beings could defend themselves against empires. An inscription had been carved into the base of the memorial. Chen read it silently, as she had done countless times before. They conquered worlds with ease until humanity's fleet blocked the stars, not with tyranny, but with the promise that no species would ever face extinction alone again. Chen allowed herself a small smile. The inscription captured something essential about humanity. They did not fight to dominate. They fought to survive, and in surviving they had changed the galaxy forever. She turned away from the memorial and looked up at the night sky. Somewhere out there, billions of beings lived in freedom because humanity had refused to surrender. Dozens of species had learned that resistance was possible. The galaxy had changed, and it could never go back to what it had been. 50 years after the siege of Seoul, the galaxy was a different place. The Valdrine Dominion was a cautionary tale told to teach the dangers of empire. The Accord of Free Worlds had grown to include 300 species. The Vigil patrolled the space between stars, ensuring that no species would face alone the kind of threat humanity had survived, and Earth remained. No longer a primitive world unknown to the galaxy, but a symbol, a reminder that some species could not be conquered, that freedom was worth any price, that empires built on force would eventually face beings who refused to submit. Admiral Sarah Chen passed away in her sleep at the age of 83. Her funeral was attended by representatives from 200 worlds. The memorial service lasted 3 days after being stood to tell stories of her leadership, her courage, and her unwavering commitment to freedom. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from an unexpected source. A Valdrine delegation attended the service, led by Kellix himself. He had spent the decades since surrender working to reform his species, to help them understand why their empire had failed. He stood before Chen's casket and spoke words that were broadcast across the galaxy. Admiral Chen taught my species a lesson we should have learned 3,000 years ago. That conquest is not strength, that domination is not greatness, that the true measure of a civilization is not how many worlds it controls, but how it treats those who cannot defend themselves. He paused, his biomechanical features showing genuine grief. She defeated us, but she did not destroy us. She gave us the chance to become something better than what we were. The Valdrine will spend the next 1,000 years trying to earn the mercy she showed us. We will never forget what she taught us, that humanity does not measure strength by those they conquer, but by those they protect. The memorial service ended with a moment of silence. Billions of beings across hundreds of worlds stopped what they were doing and thought about the woman who had changed the galaxy, the admiral who had proven that determination could overcome technology, that courage could defeat empire, that one species defending their home could inspire a galaxy to demand freedom. Earth's sun continued to shine. The planets continued their eternal dance. And among the stars, the descendants of those who had fought in the war told stories of the day humanity's fleet blocked the stars, not to conquer but to defend, not to dominate but to liberate. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity was not prey. They were the predators who protected the weak, the warriors who fought for freedom, the species that would burn their own worlds before accepting chains. And that lesson echoed across the stars for generations to come. In the schools of 100 worlds, children learned about the siege of Seoul. They learned about Admiral Chen and her defiant message to an empire. They learned about the miners on Mars who turned their tools into weapons. They learned about the sacrifices made by 370,000 humans who died so that billions could live free. The stories became legends. The legends became inspiration. And whenever a species faced oppression, whenever an empire rose with dreams of conquest, someone would remember. They would remember the day humanity stood against impossible odds and refused to break. They would remember that freedom was worth any price. They would remember that empires could fall. The Valdrine, for their part, became something unexpected. Reformed by their defeat, they dedicated themselves to peaceful pursuits. Their biomechanical expertise was turned toward medicine and engineering. Former conquerors became healers, helping species damaged by war rebuild their worlds. It was not redemption exactly. 3,000 years of conquest could not be undone, but it was a beginning. Sural, the fleet commander who had led the first failed invasion of Sol, spent his remaining centuries working with the Vigil. He trained their tactical officers, sharing everything he had learned in 200 conquests. But more importantly, he taught them what he had learned from his defeats. That technology was not enough. That confidence could be fatal. That understanding your enemy was more important than overwhelming them. He died at the age of 412, ancient even by Valdrine standards. His last words were recorded by his students. I conquered 200 worlds before I met humanity. I thought I understood warfare. I understood nothing. The humans taught me that war is not about ships or weapons. It is about will, and no species in this galaxy has a stronger will to survive than humanity. Learn from them, respect them, and pray you never have to fight them. Intelligence Prime Veshka, who had warned of humanity's unusual tenacity, became an advisor to the Accord of Free Worlds. Her vast analytical capabilities were turned toward predicting and preventing conflicts. She developed threat assessment models that helped identify aggressive species before they could build empires. Her work saved countless lives over the centuries. She maintained a strange friendship with humanity, exchanging messages with Earth's military academies. In one famous correspondence, a human general asked her what she had seen in humanity that made them different. Her response became required reading in those same academies. You are a species that prepares for extinction and calls it optimism. You build weapons to destroy your own world and call it deterrence. You fight wars with yourselves and call it practice. Every other species I studied prepared for peace and hoped war would never come. You prepare for war and create peace through strength. It is terrifying. It is effective. It is utterly, incomprehensibly human. The Retribution fleet ships remained in service for a century, eventually replaced by newer designs but never forgotten. The Humanity's Vengeance was retired and placed in orbit around Earth, transformed into a museum. Millions visited each year, walking the corridors where Admiral Chen had commanded, standing on the bridge where the final ultimatum to the Valdrine had been composed. The ship's AI, which had guided it through dozens of battles, was never deactivated. It remained online, answering questions from visitors, telling stories of the war, ensuring that the lessons learned were never forgotten. When children asked it if the war had been necessary, it always gave the same answer. War is never necessary. But survival is. We did not choose to fight. We chose not to surrender. There is a difference. Remember that difference. It may save your species someday. Mars rebuilt slowly, but the colonists never forgot their siege. They erected monuments in the tunnels where they had fought, naming them after the defenders who had died there. The planet developed a culture of fierce independence and military tradition. Martian soldiers became renowned throughout the Accord for their tenacity and skill in defensive warfare. They trained the Vigil's ground forces, teaching them how to turn any environment into a fortress. The Martian motto became famous across the galaxy, per aspera ad astra, through hardship to the stars. It captured something essential about the human experience. They had reached the stars despite every obstacle. They had survived despite every threat, and they would continue surviving, no matter what the universe threw at them. Earth itself changed profoundly. First contact and the subsequent war had unified humanity in ways that centuries of internal conflict never had. The old national divisions remained, but they seemed less important after facing extinction together. A generation grew up knowing that humanity was not alone in the universe, that there were threats beyond human understanding, and that their species had faced those threats and prevailed. But the war also left scars. Mental health services expanded dramatically to help veterans cope with trauma. Monuments to the fallen appeared in every major city. Earth's calendar added new holidays to remember the siege, the relief, and the final victory. The culture became simultaneously more peaceful and more martial, cherishing life while never forgetting the cost of defending it. The debate over humanity's role in galactic affairs continued for decades. Some advocated for expansion, for using Earth's military strength to build influence. Others preferred isolation, wanting nothing more than to be left alone. The compromise that emerged was characteristically human, practical, flexible, and based on enlightened self-interest. Earth would not build an empire, but Earth would defend its interests and its allies aggressively. Humanity would not conquer, but they would absolutely destroy any threat to human worlds or human people. The galaxy learned to navigate this carefully. Trade with humanity was profitable and welcome. Scientific cooperation was encouraged, but threatening humanity or their allies brought swift and overwhelming retaliation. The doctrine became known as the Chen Principle, named after the admiral who had embodied it. We will not start wars, but we will finish them. 100 years after the siege, the generation that had fought was mostly gone, but their children and grandchildren carried forward their legacy. Human ships patrolled the borders of the Accord. Human engineers helped build defenses for vulnerable species. Human diplomats worked to resolve conflicts before they turned violent. And in every human home, in every school, in every gathering place, the stories were told. Stories of the day the aliens came to conquer Earth. Stories of Admiral Chen's defiant response. Stories of the siege and the suffering and the ultimate victory. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things because their survival depended on it. The stories always ended the same way, with a reminder that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons or their ships or their tactics. It was their refusal to accept defeat, their willingness to fight on even when logic said to surrender, their absolute conviction that some things were worth dying for. Freedom was one of those things. 200 years after the siege, a new threat emerged in a distant part of the galaxy. A species called the Hierarchy had begun conquering their neighbors, building an empire through force and intimidation. They were powerful, technologically advanced, and utterly ruthless. When they attacked a world under Accord protection, the Vigil responded. Ships from a dozen species, led by human vessels, jumped to the threatened system. The Hierarchy forces outnumbered them significantly. The Hierarchy commander broadcast a message demanding surrender. The response came from a human captain whose grandmother had fought at Neptune. Her ship was named Indomitable Spirit, a successor to Admiral Chen's original vessel. This is Captain Maria Santos of the Vigil. You've made a mistake. You've attacked a world under our protection. We're human. We don't surrender. We don't negotiate with conquerors. We destroy them. Stand down or be destroyed. Those are your only options. The Hierarchy commander laughed. You are outnumbered 3-1. Your defeat is inevitable. Captain Santos smiled coldly. That's what the Valdrine said. Ask them how that worked out. The battle that followed was brutal but decisive. The Vigil forces fought with coordination and ferocity that shocked the Hierarchy. Human ships used tactics developed during the war with the Valdrine, refined over 2 centuries of training. They accepted damage to inflict greater damage. They turned their environment into weapons. They fought with the absolute conviction that they would win or die trying. The Hierarchy retreated after losing half their fleet. They never attacked Accord space again. Word spread through the galaxy. Humanity and their allies were not to be threatened. The lesson of Valdros Prime had been learned well. 300 years after the siege, humanity celebrated the anniversary with ceremonies across their worlds. Earth, Mars, Europa, Titan, and 100 colony worlds held services remembering those who had died. New monuments were unveiled. Old stories were retold, and a new generation promised to uphold the legacy they had inherited. In the ceremony on Earth, held at the Memorial of Resistance, a young officer stood before the assembled crowd and read the names of the dead. All 370,000 of them. It took 16 hours. The officer's voice grew hoarse, but she never stopped. Each name deserved to be spoken. Each person deserved to be remembered. When she finished, she looked up at the stars visible in Earth's night sky and spoke the words that had become traditional at such ceremonies. We remember, we honor, we defend. Never again will humanity face extinction alone. Never again will freedom be taken without cost. We are the children of those who fought. We carry their courage forward. We are human. We endure. The crowd repeated the final words in unison. We are human. We endure. And across the galaxy, on ships and stations and worlds beyond counting, other voices echoed the same sentiment. Human voices, yes, but also voices of species that humanity had helped liberate. Species that had learned from human example. Species that knew what freedom cost and what it was worth. The day humanity's fleet blocked the stars was not just a military victory. It was the moment when the galaxy learned that some species could not be conquered, that freedom was contagious, that empires built on force would always eventually face those who refused to submit. Admiral Sarah Chen had understood this. It was why she had shown mercy to the Valdrine, why she had built an accord rather than an empire, why she had spent her final years teaching others the lessons she had learned. Power without restraint became tyranny. Victory without mercy became atrocity. Strength without wisdom became weakness. The galaxy needed defenders, not conquerors, protectors, not oppressors. And humanity, forged in the fires of internal conflict and tempered by the threat of extinction, had become exactly that. The stars no longer belonged to empires. They belonged to free beings who had learned at terrible cost that freedom was worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. And if another empire rose, if another threat emerged, if another species tried to conquer what should remain free, the galaxy knew what would happen. Humanity's fleet would block the stars once more, not with tyranny, but with the promise that no species would ever face extinction alone again. That was the legacy of Admiral Sarah Chen and all those who had fought beside her. That was the gift they had given to the galaxy. That was the lesson that would echo across the stars for as long as sentient beings looked up at the night sky and dreamed of freedom. The end of the Valdrine Dominion was not the end of conflict, but it was the end of easy conquest. It was the moment when the galaxy learned that some species would rather burn than bow, that determination could overcome technology, that courage could defeat empire, and humanity, having learned those lessons in the hardest way possible, made sure the galaxy never forgot them. The stars stood witness to it all. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had seen species emerge and vanish. They had seen war and peace, conquest and liberation, tyranny and freedom. But they had never seen anything quite like humanity. The species that prepared for extinction and called it optimism. The species that fought themselves for practice. The species that refused to be conquered. The species whose fleet had blocked the stars and changed the galaxy forever.